This video contains lots of spoilers for the game Immortality, and I would wholeheartedly recommend playing through that game before watching this video. Seriously, go play Immortality. I started watching more movies recently. I think it was around the time the podcast Blank Check with Griffin and David started covering the works of Michael Mann. I wanted to catch up on their backlog during the initial months of the COVID-19 pandemic and had tons of classic movies I'd never seen. The Terminator, Robocop, Broadcast News. Eventually, I set out to watch at least one movie every day I could. In the last year, I've watched about 180 movies, and I'm pretty sure I'll top 200 by the end of the year. In watching more movies this year than I have in the last 5, maybe 10 years combined, I realized I don't think I'm all that good at looking at most of the screens I'm looking at most of the day. I've come to love a handful of movies in the last year. The Killing of Two Lovers, Drive My Car, Stars at Noon. But there are just so many goddamn movies to watch. And a lot of them just kind of happened to me. I'd sit down near the end of the day, put a movie on, and then about a half hour in, just tune out. This happened with a lot of classic movies, things that top best of lists and have long-standing cult followings. It doesn't help that a lot of the choices I made about what to watch were made by podcasts I listened to, or what other people were talking about on Twitter, or just the compulsion to keep up with modern movies. It made watching movies this never-ending task list. It felt like homework. I was so wrapped up with the why of whatever I was watching, of keeping up with the task list of movies and other media I took in, that as often as I might have been wrapped up in the story a screen was trying to show me, been struck by a particular shot that looked really nice, or a really emotional line reading, I'd look at my phone, think about work. I'd read a synopsis of whatever I was watching as I was watching it and convince myself I was engaged. Or just wait until the movie was over and cross it off the list. Call it a bad attention span, the lure of all the distractions of our modern age. But there's something about the way that I think a lot of other people, watch movies now that makes them feel less valuable. So many screens are fighting for our attention all the time, and it's easier than ever to just tune them out. To ignore one screen for another and just hop back and forth, not really absorbing either. To just dismiss and devalue everything that goes into every single screen we see without paying attention to all the layers that make them up. You spend a lot of time in Immortality interacting with a screen, but not in the way you interact with most video games. You're not controlling a character with an analog stick, pressing buttons to beat up enemies, or moving blocks around to solve puzzles. You're watching videos, passively taking in information. You might be tempted to call Immortality a kind of non-interactive video game, but what makes Immortality one of the most spellbinding games of 2022 is how active I felt as I watched it. The first thing you see when you play Immortality is a warning. It's the kind of cultural disclaimer that's recently popped up before some of the more racist Disney cartoons you can find on Disney+. In the main menu, you can read an in-fiction about page that tells you it's a piece of computer software, an attempt to preserve the work of Marcel, a fictional actress. This is an entirely fictional story, and share it so that Marissa may live again in the hearts of audiences. This warning primes you to look at Immortality as a researcher, not a viewer. You're conditioned to analyze Immortality more than enjoy it, like someone watching the director's commentary for a movie in order to, write an essay about it. But even here, Immortality tips its hand. In that about page, there's a bit of highlighted text that plants the question it wants you to spend the next several hours answering. What happened to Marcel? By asking that question before you've even started watching it, Immortality wants you to process all of the footage you're about to see as a way to obsess over Marcel. To watch the screens she brings to life with an ulterior motive. It's a mystery, the kind of story where you're asked to pay a little more attention than usual. To put the clues the screen shows you together in order to answer a question before the characters in the film can. It's the game saying, pay attention. Immortality then piles on so many layers of interactivity and meaning onto every screen it shows you, then unravels all of those layers, one by one, all in an effort to get you to truly appreciate the cost and value of every screen you see. Before you can start watching anything, you're shown a grid with hundreds of short clips of the 3 fictional movies Marcel starred in. An adaptation of a real book about a monk who seduces a priest called Ambrosio, a 70s crime flick about a detective who falls in love with a suspect in a murder case called Minsky, and a Los Angeles-soaked thriller named Two of Everything about a starlet named Maria who starts to rely on a body double to get through the more grueling parts of being a celebrity. Only Ambrosio was ever finished, and even then, you don't get to watch that entire movie. Instead, you get a general sense of what these films were like by watching about 9 hours of leftover footage from the films themselves, but also their production and promotion. Auditions, casting meetings, rehearsals, rap parties, interviews on nightly shows, commercials, camcorder tapes cast members filmed in bed with each other, everything. You can pick any of the nearly 300 video clips that make up Immortality as your first. The moment you pick one, though, all the others disappear. To restore them, you have to pause the scene you're watching, then click on anything in that scene, whether that's an actor's face or a random vase. The screen then zooms in on that thing, then zooms out to take you into another scene that includes that thing. That's the most physical way you interact with Immortality. You click on objects in videos so you can watch more videos. All through movies, as well as all the other videos, are split up into short, digestible chunks. They're usually around 30 seconds, and at most a handful of minutes long. It's a pretty clever way to gamify watching movies. Instead of looking at your phone while a whole movie plays out, you move on to the next scene as soon as you're done with it by clicking on something. It's sort of like the way text-based games gamify text by splitting their hundreds of thousands of words into short snippets. If you do it right, it feels good to click into the next piece of text and keep reading because the smaller chunks make reading more manageable. Watching the footage in Immortality is compulsive the way most good video game mechanics are. You can't die in Immortality. There's no fail state that forces you to go back and watch videos again. So you're always compelled to just keep watching and take in more screens. That compulsive loop is how Immortality casts its spell. It didn't take long for it to hook me. Not just because I wanted to figure out what happened to Marissa and Marcel, but because I had so many nested reasons to just keep clicking and watching footage. I was interacting with Immortality much more deeply than by just clicking on objects. Immortality gives you a lot of reasons to look at the screen. First, there's the reason to watch just about anything. The vibes. Immortality's got some pretty cool vibes. Now, I'm not a film major by any means, but Immortality does a good enough job of capturing the look of the eras of film each of Marissa and Marcel's movies try to replicate. The constrained shot composition and painted backgrounds in Ambrosio, the loose traveling cameras and on-location shots of Minsky, the way the color palette and setting of Two of Everything reminds me of late 90s David Lynch films like Lost Highway and Mulholland Drive. I'm just familiar enough with the stylings each of these films is drawing on to appreciate their throwback look. You can appreciate each clip, especially early on when you have no context for what's actually going on in them, just for the ways they simulate the act of watching a movie. The crackling audio of the older movies that Ambrosio's aping, the way the team at Half Mermaid actually went through the trouble of not only filming this scene in Ambrosio to look like a 1960s film, but then also ran it through another filter so that it looked like it was part of a TV interview Marissa conducted to promote the movie, really gets you to appreciate the aesthetics of films from across different eras. It's easy to excuse some of the cut corners in the action, the wardrobe, the weird wigs, as an intentional byproduct of trying to replicate a low-budget film like, say, Let Sleeping Corpses Lie. Then there's that whole clicking on different things in a scene thing. As you watch more scenes and the novelty of the old school film vibes start wearing off, you start darting your eyes around the screen looking for new objects to click on so you can unlock new scenes to watch. Also, because you're watching all these scenes out of order, your brain has to work a little harder to put the basic story of the films together. How does this random scene of Ambrosio I just watched connect to the last one? Maybe if I click on another thing, an object specific to the set of Ambrosio, I'll piece the plot of this one movie together. It helps turn watching these clips into a game, sure, but it also means that every clip is presented as a bite-sized clue, or a red herring to pore over, and your mind wants to fill in all the gaps between the random clips you watch. As you make those connections, you start looking for narrative clues to piece together what happened to Marissa and Marcel. One potential clue starts staring you in the face pretty quickly, depending on what scenes you watch. Ambrosio and Minsky were filmed in 1968 and 1970, but Two of Everything, Marissa's final film, was filmed in 1999. And yet Marissa, despite having the goofiest bright blonde wig in her final movie, looks exactly the same age. What could possibly be going on there? So you go into each scene asking, how does this help me solve the mystery of what happened to Marissa and Marcel? How did the audition tapes and casting meetings that led up to the filming of Ambrosio inform the acting in each scene? What does the fact that Marissa and her co-lead in Minsky, Carl Greenwood, dated during that film's production, while Marissa was also seemingly dating director John Durick, say about Marissa's ultimate fate? How does Marissa's behavior in the behind-the-scenes footage of Two of Everything reveal about what's happened to her in the years since Minsky? Then another motivation might start to set in. If you want to solve the mystery behind the disappearance of Marissa Marcel, it might help to have every piece of available footage. And maybe that's how you solve the mystery. So then the reason you come to every scene starts to morph. You might start playing Immortality to enjoy the vibes, but eventually you're caught up in its mystery and its systems, trying to exploit them to get the best outcome, the revelation of the truth. You pay less attention to the vibes, the acting, the story, and start scanning each scene for objects to click on, things in the background you may not have noticed before. Have you clicked on that vase before? Maybe there are multiple scenes with vases in them. You start scanning scenes like a detective investigating a murder. When you eventually start going back to scenes you watched earlier, it doesn't feel like grunt work, because by the time you return to them, they're loaded with new meanings and potential threads now that you better understand how everything's connected. If you're like me, you start trying to find every single scene in the game, pressing objects and scenes with abandon in the hopes you'll finally unlock one of the scenes you're missing. And, okay, sometimes you try to click on whatever the hell this thing is, and even though you know there's another scene with that exact object in it because you looked it up online and for some reason it teleports you to this fucking thing instead. Anyway, you fully gamified this mystery because hours in, you have all these reasons to watch the screen. The vibes, scanning for objects to click on, putting together the details of individual scenes, piecing together the story of multiple scenes, gaining insight about the relationships between the actors outside of the films, connecting the themes of all three films to each other, solving the mystery of what happened to Marissa Marcel, and getting alternate readings of scenes based on repeat viewings. These layers overlap in ways that make each scene seem much more dense than they were at first. During one scene in Ambrosio, for example, Sofia Morgana, the Italian actress played by Joshua Schlesers, begins to cry. Except the scene doesn't call for it. So why does she do it? Is it because one of the actress's internal struggles, or is it tied to some of the other threads you're watching these scenes in search of? Every scene starts to exude all these different layers of meaning all at once. I watched several scenes multiple times in a row, looking for different things each time. And yeah, most of these layers apply to any kind of audiovisual work. All movies have vibes. You're trying to follow what's going on in any given scene during a film and tying it to the other scenes you've seen, and using that to solve a mystery or arrive at a reading or understanding of the film's message or themes. But the way Immortality breaks each of its films apart, adds a few metatextual layers, and gets you to play detective, all put you in a mood to actually pay attention to those layers individually, to think about them critically. There's some cool payoffs for this too. The acting required in some of these scenes is layered. In some scenes, Manning Gage, the real-life actor who plays Marissa Marcel, is playing an angel in the body of an actress who is playing the embodiment of the devil, inhabiting a seductress trying to pass herself off as an innocent monk. It's confusing as hell, but it's fun to watch because these performances become more and more informed by how many threads you've unraveled by that point. That's not tangential to why I love Immortality, it's the whole reason. Playing it means putting together and taking apart the medium of film one layer at a time. It highlights just how intricate a process it is to put anything on a screen by putting all of the elements that comprise it, the actors who play each character, the crew members working the slates, the writing process, the rehearsals, everything, under a microscope. In laying all of its layers so bare, Immortality is a kind of primer for how to deconstruct and appreciate any kind of visual storytelling. And then you notice that noise.
You're not who I thought you were. What I thought you were.
It's probably difficult to build a twist into a game where you could see the finale in the first 20 minutes, but Immortality definitely has a twist. Or at least it has a secret layer. I picked up on the strange, ominous noise that accompanied some of the clips I was watching a couple of hours in, but I chalked it up to a distinct, but odd, choice of music. You might not catch on to it at first, especially if you're playing with a mouse and keyboard. If you're playing with a controller, it rumbles when this noise plays. If you rewind at the right time after hearing this noise, you get a subverted version of the same scene, in which Marissa, or one of a few other actors, are replaced by one of two new characters. The one, played by Charlotte Molin, and the other one, played by Timothy Lee DePriest. Then there are the other hidden scenes, in which the one appears in black and white and delivers monologues, exposition, some pretty important narrative beats, and, you know, the Antony and the Johnsons version of Candy Says against a black backdrop.
Candy says, I've come to hate my body.
Since we're tracking layers, this adds watching scenes because there might be a hidden scene to uncover, putting together the story of the subverted scenes, connecting subverted scenes to the rest of the story, putting together the story of the one's monologues, connecting the one's monologues to the rest of the story, and putting together what actually happened by tying subverted scenes to the rest of the game. Getting to the end of Immortality, by which I mean triggering the credits, requires that you find enough of these subverted scenes to uncover what is chronologically the last clip of the Marissa Marcel preservation project this whole piece of software is pretending to be. Watching your first subverted scene feels like stumbling headlong into a rabbit hole. The impact this has depends on which subverted scene you see first, but I'm willing to bet that no matter which one you find first, it's a jarring moment. The eerie noise, the suddenness of the cut that leads to an actor suddenly disappearing and being replaced by another. Just the filmmaking alone here is unnerving. I wouldn't quite call Immortality a horror game, but it is creepier than a lot of horror games and movies. The one is a disturbing figure because she violates every rule of the filmmaking Immortality has gotten you to fixate on. Mullen is constantly looking at you. She inhabits multiple actors, wears clothes that don't fit her, and cheerily breaks all of the boundaries of time and space you've unconsciously created as a viewer by watching hours of footage that follow the rules. She doesn't belong here. She's a screen staring back at you. As surprising as the reveal of this layer is, though, I'd kind of been waiting for it to happen. As fascinating as the clips I'd been watching until then were to watch, something did feel missing from them. Some truth behind the mystery I was trying to solve felt withheld. I was getting insight into who these actors were, what kind of person Marissa Marcel was, who the people working with her were. Some threads had cropped up. There's the running thread of more experienced workers in the film industry exploiting and corrupt their younger ones, innocence being offered up at the altar of fame, the physical toll and vulnerability of creating art. But Immortality had turned me into a detective, not a viewer, and I was looking for something deeper, another layer to fixate on. The title, Immortality, and the fact that Marissa looks the same age in 1999 as she is in 1970, signal that something weird is clearly going on. The way you interact with Immortality tells you there's always something else to look for, and when you finally do find that secret something, Immortality can feel a little heavy-handed at times. Once you figure out how the subverted scenes work, the one and the other one essentially lay out the entire mystery in a way that leaves very little doubt about what actually happened to Marissa Marcel. But Immortality has to be heavy-handed here, and I'm a good argument for why. I spent so much time watching footage in Immortality when I first played through it a few months ago that I didn't realize how many of its screens had just flown past me. I saw the credits, found most of the subverted scenes, and clicked on as many objects as I needed to unlock every clip. But it was only while working on this very essay that I went back and watched all of the footage in Immortality, including the subverted scenes, in the order they were filmed, and realized how much of the story I had actually missed the first time. Watching Immortality this way made me realize just how colossal a writing feat it is. This is a game made up of 3 separate film scripts, with undercurrents in and outside those scripts that involve the various cast and crew members to breadcrumb clues about the larger mystery. With an additional layer of surrealist narrative in the subverted scenes, delivered in short monologues that have to be as clear and concise as possible, while also getting across important info. There are almost 9 hours of video here, and the amount of planning it must have taken to pull all this off seems staggering. And yet, when you watch all the clips in order, it's surprising how straightforward the story they tell is. Ambrosio is about a seemingly pious priest who succumbs to temptation and the desire for evil to corrupt innocence. Minsky is about the rare cop who is genuinely interested in helping people, delving into the depths of the art world and seeing how the corrupt nature of power can take hold in any industry. Two of Everything is about the promise, cost, and structures of fame, about visions of stardom corrupted by power. And they're okay. Ambrosio is based on a real book, so it has the firmest legs to stand on. Minsky and Two of Everything are admittedly kind of flimsy, but they're fun enough to watch in this strange out-of-context way. The scenes here don't amount to a full film, but because the game teaches you to watch them differently than you would an actual film, your mind has fun filling in all the little gaps they leave. More importantly though, these movies weren't made to stand alone, because Immortality isn't about these 3 movies. They're meant to serve the story that ties them all together, the one behind and beneath all of its screen, the one you build out of disparate pieces over the course of several hours. They're meant to help you with the question you're really here to answer. What happened to Marissa Marcel? Okay, here's what happened to Marissa Marcel. So the one and the other one, the 2 characters who replace actors in the subverted scenes, are either angels or demons or muses or some kind of beings with immortality who existed alongside but separate from humanity for millennia, then eventually started living through them, literally devouring humans to absorb their bodies and memories. The woman we know as Marissa Marcel was originally a French girl in World War II. And for a while, the One lived as Marissa after she devoured her. We watched the One be cast in Ambrosio as Marissa, the other one joining her later. The One flirts with the director of photography, John Durick, and the two co-create Minsky after the director of Ambrosio runs off with the negatives for that film. Then the other One returns and asks the One to choose between him and humanity. Their relationship falls apart, and the One shoots the other one on camera, so production of Minsky ends. Marissa seems to disappear, but is actually just dead, since the One jumps bodies from her to John after the One tells John about her immortality, and John decides to start controlling her. The One and the other one can come back to life after being killed by basically anything, but this time, because the other one died on screen, he somehow becomes trapped in the footage and is revived inside the actress Amy Archer after she somehow gets her hands on footage from Minsky and watches the other one die in it. The other one and the One, the latter of whom has been living as John Durick and working in showbiz since then, reunite to create two of everything, during the production of which the One is able to both work as John and bring Marissa back to life as a kind of puppet. But this takes enough of a toll on her that she begins to bleed from her skull and pass out regularly. Inspired by the death of the other one, she decides to burn herself alive on film and eventually devour the first person who watches the footage, which it turns out is you, the player. She's a part of you now. Congrats. A lot of my favorite art is stuff I still don't fully understand. The first time I watched Inherent Vice, it confused the shit out of me. I adored its rendition of 1970s California. Basically, all of the performances are pitch perfect, and it's genuinely funny, somber, or incredibly heartfelt when it needs to be. But a lot of the plot points just whizzed by me. I didn't grok how most of the scenes flowed into one another, and by the end, I was puzzled at the ending. But the look and feel of that movie were so captivating that I had to dig deeper. I had to read the book, follow along with online annotations, then watch the movie again to really understand what was going on. It's one of my favorite films of all time, and part of that is because I had to work to peel apart its layers. Being able to come to art from different angles each time is what makes it so rewarding. For a game that hits a lot of the same notes as some of the best and most mystifying movies I've seen, it's actually kind of rare how clear-cut a lot of Immortality is. Its plot is actually kind of easy to understand by comparison, especially when it's laid out end to end. It's not a simple story, but it's clearly conveyed, and I'm actually surprised at how unsubtle it is a lot of the time. That might sound like a gotcha, as if the chronological viewing of a game made up of separate clips like Immortality is its true form, and that by splitting it up into clips and making you watch them out of order, it's trying to hide flimsy storytelling by making it interactive. The thing is, Immortality can't afford to be more subtle because, for as much as it feels like a movie, it's a game. It's a piece of software that introduces concepts, trains you to use and apply them, then delivers positive feedback when you succeed at implementing those concepts. The basic interaction here might be clicking on objects to watch more videos, but Immortality is a game about gamifying film viewership, and it has to reward you for investing in all the layers of film it shows you. By the time you get to the ending, you've probably been poking around all the clips for a good 6 to 10 hours. That's a long time to scrub through footage without a real payoff, especially when you're the one doing the work. And the answer the game gives you, on the whole, is pretty satisfying. It's a story about the innate and powerful drive to create we all have, to leave behind something that will grant us something like immortality. About how the passion and inspiration that fuel that drive can be corrupted and turned against itself. And about how the most beautiful parts of being human are our limits, our mortality. That's what the plot means to me. And I'm sure there are a lot of other readings of these same plot points. More importantly though, Immortality's mechanics teach you that stories aren't just a list of plot points. If art were simply about the events that occurred in them, you could just read Wikipedia entries all day and feel just as satisfied by them. Instead of listening to a true crime podcast, you could just look up whether the murderer really did it or what actually happened and be done with it. We don't do that because the stories we take in are as much about how they say something as much as what they're saying. About the emotions and thoughts and themes that bleed through their canvases. In its scrambled clips, its endearing emulation of film, its hidden videos, and all the other pieces it has you manipulate to get to those plot points, Immortality layers more depth onto its plot. How perspective can affect how we absorb the world around us, the power of individual images, and how the most seemingly insignificant moments can have layered meanings if we'd care enough to examine them more closely. These are themes Immortality only imparts when you interact with it, and they get you to fall in love with the how of it all, not just the why. Immortality is about the power that anything on a screen can have over us. It's about how just the act of watching a screen and all the pieces that comprise it can be satisfying on its own. That sounds obvious, and it kind of is, But that's also easy to forget when stories and the screens they appear on are so easy to absorb and discard. Immortality had left a remarkable impression on me before I even understood what actually happens in it. That's because at a time when I had trouble keeping my eyes on any single screen, and still do if I'm being honest, Immortality forced me to watch its screens with rapt attention in a way I had taken for granted. But after seeing everything its vibes, its acting, its point-and-click immediacy, its smaller story threads, its recurring ones, and its ultimate conclusion are all pointing towards, I love it even more. One of the ways we've accustomed ourselves to the slew of watchable content we're inundated by is by tuning a lot of it out. But the other way we've reacted is to invest more deeply in the screens that actually reach us, to make the stuff we love more meaningful. If the surge of podcasts and TV shows that discuss other TV shows or episodes of TV breaking themselves down after the credits roll are anything to go by, I'm not alone. We want to connect with all the screens and the stories they tell more deeply. There's just a lot of things that stop us from doing that now. Immortality made me appreciate all the layers of the screen, and the people who inspire the images we see on them, put those images together, curate and edit those images, and even the people who watch and value them at a time when I needed it to. It made me rediscover how, despite how many screens we can watch at any time and how disposable they can feel, we have a powerful desire to sit down and peel apart all the layers of every screen we come across. All we need to do is watch.